Hello and welcome to the program. I am Adeshewa Udushoga. The Nigerian oil sector has been facing some challenges in recent times in the area of critically needed reforms and revenue stabilization. Experts have been warning that without strategic interventions, Nigeria may be headed down the gloomy path of economic doom as currently experienced by Venezuela. Across boards, experts unanimously believe that the mismanagement of the nation's oil resources by the political class is a key factor. In Nigeria, one of the signals cited for the gloomy predictions in the oil sector is the president's refusal to sign the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill. The bill is one of the four parts of the proposed Petroleum Industry Bill, seeking to update and replace the outdated provisions with the current petroleum industry law. The situation has since been generating reactions from the industry experts who are also backing the bill across the country. Some people believe it will reduce corruption in the petroleum industry and that not signing it into law is a cause for worry. But the president says he has refused to sign the bill due to constitutional and legal reasons, adding that it is inappropriate to speak on the content of executive communications addressed to the legislature until same has been read on the floor in plenary. Former Minister of Education Obi Ezekwesili, speaking during a dialogue series addressing stakeholders and presidential aspirants, thinks deregulating the oil sector could be a rescue effort.
There is subsidies going on, but they've sent the NNPC says it is cost under recovery. You're saying at what point will the shoe drop and the citizens are made to know that there are hidden costs not being declared at this point in time? And when would there be the boldness to confront that situation? Because it must be confronted. And the fact that the distortions in the sector and the pricing systems of the sector just simply are calling for bold conversation and bold decisions. When I recall when this government first came in, and then there was that discussion about subsidy, no subsidy, and all that. And I said, guys, it's your opportunity to deregulate this sector. End this dance, Macabre dance. Deregulate the sector. Stop wanting to have political control of oil sector. You don't need it, except if you're inclined towards certain kinds of things. Otherwise, deregulate the sector. The day the petroleum sector is fully deregulated, there are people who will never think of wanting to be president of Nigeria. Because for them, that's the slothfulness of leadership. You become the president who governs over easy rent, which if you slept all day at work and at home, would go to the coffers. That's not the kind of leadership that a nation like Nigeria deserves.
Another signal is the worrisome trend in the oil sector in Nigeria of mismanaging oil revenues. Obi Ezekwesili says the problem becomes compounded when aided by the poor savings culture entrenched deeply in the constitution.
One of the issues as far as revenue from oil management is concerned is that there is a data integrity issue. And it starts with the body that is responsible for running the sector on the behalf of the government. Now, if NNPC stopped being almost like an establishment of government and put itself through market discipline, it would not have problems with data integrity. Because the market will immediately punish that bad behavior. But look at this. You have a situation where 2014 and 2016 data just diverges by as much as 22.8 million barrels. Like it's, like it's a normal thing.
Now, joining me is energy expert Bala Zakar to look at the problems, reforms and solutions to steer the sector from fulfilling its doomsday prophecy. Thank you for joining us, Bala. There have been gloomy predictions, as earlier mentioned, that Nigerian oil sector may be heading towards economic doom, like that of Venezuela, in the face of needed reforms which have not been put in place, like the PIG bill. Could these predictions be true?
Well, I'm a general optimist as far as my great country, Nigeria, is concerned. And I'm also a strong optimist when it comes to the oil and gas industry. But when we talk about reforms, as far as the oil and gas industry is concerned, I am a bit worried. I'm worried because whenever you talk about policies that have to do with the oil and gas industry, there is what we call technical implications, economic implications, commercial implications, operational implications, and political implications. So when you talk straight away about like the petroleum industry bill, remember it was broken into 4 parts and only one has been discussed by the National Assembly, which is the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill. But look at it this way. When we broke the original 223-page petroleum industry bill that existed in the previous dispensation of President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan and former Minister for Petroleum, Diziani Alison Madueke, as far as I'm concerned, I was very comfortable with the 223-page document. When the new dispensation came and the government that succeeded them, they felt there was a need to break the petroleum industry bill into 4 segments, right? And out of the 4, we are now assuming that each segment of the bill or each of the bills now, each of the 4 bills will be like 25%. We have discussed, or the National Assembly has discussed and passed the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill and have even sent it to the government for assent. This is the way I want to explain it and relate it to why I feel we have not made reasonable progress as far as the oil and gas industry is concerned. If you look at the 4 bills, we have only passed one, which is the PIGB. So if you assume each of the 4 bills is 25%, right, we can comfortably say that the National Assembly has spent 75% or more than 75% of its political life and has only succeeded in passing only 25% of the petroleum industry bill. This is the way to also explain it. As we speak today, the members of the National Assembly have spent more than 75% of their political life. They have less than 25% of their political life now to live. But as far as the petroleum industry bill is concerned, they have only succeeded in passing the PIGB, that's the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, into law, and that is only 25% of the entire bill. We now still have about 75% of the entire bill because there are 3 bills still outstanding. So mathematically or practically we can say the National Assembly or the government of this dispensation has only succeeded in passing only 25% of the total petroleum industry bill. Meanwhile, they have spent more than 75% of their political life. So we will comfortably also say that the next government is likely to come and work on the remaining 75% of the petroleum industry bill. So practically, proportionally, if you look at it, it's as good as saying only 75% of the bill has been worked upon. And more than 75%, only 25% of the bill has been worked upon, but more than 75% of this dispensation or political government life is gone.
Now, the president has refused to sign the PIGB, one of the petroleum industry bill. What is the implication of this action to the Nigerian oil sector?
If the petroleum industry bill is not passed into law, we don't need anybody as Nigerians to let us know or to bring it to our understanding that eventually we are going to grind the industry to a halt. We will grind this industry to a cul-de-sac, and there will be doom waiting for us. The answer is very, very practical and can be explained. Every country that has sectors, regardless of the sectors you are talking about, needs to be guided by laws. As far as Nigeria is concerned, we've been talking about the petroleum industry bill for years. And if you don't pass these bills into laws, that means you're not going to have legal and procedural standards that you will use to regulate that industry. So as far as we are concerned, not passing the petroleum industry bill into law simply means that regulatory standards will not be there, investors will keep away because they will not know the laws and the contractual understanding that they will need to go into as far as Nigerian oil and gas industry is concerned. And principally, if you're talking about regulatory standards or legal standards, you require two ingredients. The first one is international acceptance, right? And the second one is local tolerance. And when you talk about international acceptance, you simply means because the oil is a global commodity, the oil and gas industry is a global industry. That simply means you are dealing with international currency, international product, and international cartel. And that simply means you need laws that will have international acceptance. And once you have international acceptance, that means multinationals will come and contract with you. Then the next thing has to do with local tolerance. And when we talk about local tolerance, it simply means some of the laws must accommodate the peculiarities of your local industry and your local people. Things like the communities, things like corporate social responsibilities, and how you are going to transfer technology. So once you have these two principal ingredients, that is international acceptance and local tolerance, the law will be suitable to go. But as far as we have not even passed the petroleum industry bill into law, we don't even know whether the laws will have international acceptance or local tolerance. And if we don't do that, we will eventually grind this industry to a cul-de-sac.
Well, some experts believe the best option is that we deregulate the oil sector. Do you think this is an alternative?
Generally, regardless of the sectors you're talking about, if a country is an importing country, if a country has a weak currency, if a country has local products, the worst thing that country is going to do is to deregulate. Personally, I'm against deregulation. And the reason why I'm against deregulation is because Nigeria is an importing country. Nigeria is not a manufacturing country. Then Nigeria has a very weak currency. Nigeria does not have power. What we need to do is to build the industry first, build it to a particular standard. If you build it to a particular standard, then you can deregulate. As far as I am concerned, I am for liberalization. I believe in liberalization, and what liberalization simply means is government should be ably involved, then private sectors should also be ably involved, then standards should be set. Meanwhile, when you even talk about sectoral management, you are either talking about deregulation, privatization, commercialization, or liberalization. Considering our weak currency, considering the fact that we are an importing nation and the raw material is with us, it is better to liberalize the industry or the oil and gas sector. If we liberalize it after a particular level and we are able to build internal capacity, then we can now deregulate. And when we deregulate, then locally we can compete, and outsiders or multinationals can come in and compete with us. As far as I am concerned, I am for liberalization and not deregulation.
So in your own opinion now, what do you think could be wrong with the revenue management of the sector? and what is the way forward?
Generally, when you talk about revenue management, it depends on whether you're talking about the public sector or the private sector. But as far as I am concerned, also as a Nigerian, as somebody who believes in the Nigerian oil and gas industry, I will be happy if I see a blend. And what I mean by a blend is this: let the Nigerians come in, the public sector come in, the government should come in, and let us have the private sector working together. When you talk about the public sector, their method of business is different. When you talk about the private sector, the method of business is different. But when you have the private sector and the government collaborating together, then we are going to have a better industry. If you leave it entirely to the private sector, knowing that Nigeria is a weak country with a weak economy and also a weak currency, we are likely to suffer from what we call high degree of capitalism. And when you leave it to just the public sector, we are supposed to graduate from what we call pseudo-communism, and get to pseudo-capitalism. So we need the blend of the public sector and the private sector. And when the public sector is going to be involved, let the public sector, in this case government, be involved in setting regulatory standards. Then the private sector will bring in human capacity, they will bring in technology, and they will bring in advancement. If you have the blend, then we are going to have 100% efficiency and effectiveness.
Moving on, if there is one thing investors, especially foreign investors, don't like, it is an atmosphere of political uncertainty. So with general elections in Nigeria scheduled for early next year, foreign investors in the country seems to be moving their investments elsewhere, at least until they are sure of how things would pan out. At the moment, there is an observable decline in the foreign direct investment, and a lot of capital and funds are fast finding their way out of the country. A supporting evidence of this trend is the Central Bank of Nigeria's latest data release, which revealed that the nation's foreign exchange reserves fell in September by $1.57 billion. The external reserves, which stood at $45.838 billion at the end of August, declined to $44.380 billion on September 7, 2018. The figures from the Apex Bank had earlier revealed that the reserves, which had continued to go down in recent months, fell by $990.98 million from $47.11 billion in July to $46.128 billion on August 23, 2018. But the Central Bank of Nigeria is saying that the recent evolution of the forex market in the country had been influenced by a number of factors, which include the changing pattern of international trade, institutional changes in the economy, and structural shifts in production. There is also that issue of U.S. Federal Reserve's raising interest rates as well. Well, I still have Bala Zaka on standby. According to a recent report, the nation's foreign exchange reserves fell in September by $1.57 billion.
Correct.
Just coupled with the fact that we are in the season of elections, could this be a factor, and what do you think is the cause for this?
Well, there are so many reasons why the foreign reserve of a country will go down. In the case of Nigeria, what is our debt to GDP ratio? When you look at our debt to GDP ratio, our debt to GDP ratio is just rising. Our revenue to GDP ratio is going down. So if you have your revenue to GDP ratio going down and your debt to GDP ratio going up, then your external reserve is likely to suffer. And like we said, we are more of an importing nation than a nation that is into manufacturing. And we are a nation that believes more on what countries or nations outside our own country can provide. When you talk about health services, we go out to look for health services. That plays so much, that is so much in terms of the kind of foreign exchange. Basically when you talk about medical tourism, when you talk about education, others don't come to Nigeria to look for education. Rather, we go outside. That hits us hard also. And in recent times, we have embarked on serious borrowing. And when you continue to borrow, you don't manufacture. people don't come into your country, or people don't import from your country, rather you are an importing nation, the technical and natural thing that will happen is that your external reserves will be hit. Definitely when you talk about election years coming, or penultimate years to election years, there are likely to be campaigns. When you have serious campaigns taking place, that will generally just create what I can call money mobility, because the monies will be spent within Nigeria. So the money spent within Nigeria is to enhance general circulation and mobility of money. I don't have a problem with that. I will only have a problem if the monies that are going to be spent on ballot boxes, if the monies that are going to be spent on ballot cards, PVCs and the rest are spent so that we procure them from outside. But if we are going to get the ballot boxes, if we are going to get the PVCs and other materials for the elections locally, you will just create internal mobility of money and cash, and Nigerians will benefit. But we all know that we import virtually everything into Nigeria, and that will definitely hit us as far as being a country is concerned and being a government is concerned.
Recently, the country had some issues with foreign investors, causing some of the investors to withdraw their businesses. Shouldn't this be a cause for worry for the nation?
Sure. I mean, when you see investors, pulling out of your own country, then certain things are probably not going right. And when certain things are not going right, what you need to ask yourself is this: what are the kind of policies that you have in your country? And before you even ask, what are policies? To me, policies are statements that define the national philosophy of a country and must be seen to be reflected in the political thinking of leaders. So the question is this: what are the policies on oil and gas? What are the policies on health? What are the policies on taxes? By the time you answer all these questions, then you will understand why investors are pulling out. What are the policies on security? So if investors are coming in and a country is continuously looking insecure, if the degree of insecurity is going up rather than coming down, then something is wrong. If for any reason the tax system is looking as if investors are always being hit, why wouldn't they leave? And we have cases where if investors default and you can confirm that what happened was actually not a calculated error and what happened was not an intentional error, you shouldn't be too punitive to them, because you need them and we need the blend. So as far as I'm concerned, if investors are leaving, they are definitely leaving because of what we best describe as business climate hostilities.
Now, recently, the U.S. foreign reserves are beginning to raise their interest rates, and this may cause foreign investors in Nigeria to withdraw their businesses away from Nigeria. What do you think Nigeria should do to avoid being affected by this development?
Well, we can understand what the U.S. is trying to do. The U.S. is trying to preserve its economy internally. So many world economies can say the U.S. can go to hell, or they can call a bluff of the U.S. But the U.S. is also one of the very strong international economies that we have. In the case of Nigeria, we cannot afford to do that because, first of all, we are an importing nation. We have a very weak country. We have a very high population, and when you talk about, again, the security index is relatively high. So we cannot try what the U.S. is doing. If we try what the U.S. is doing, then we are going to fall from a cliff into a trough. As far as the U.S. is concerned, there are so many internal mechanisms that the U.S. can do. And remember again, the U.S. can do what it is doing because the U.S. is a superpower. There are some nations that will be willing to negotiate with the U.S., but how many nations will be willing to negotiate with Nigeria? That is one side of it. And come to look at it again, even the crude oil we boast about, some countries can do without the Nigerian crude oil. Unfortunately, when we decided that we were going to diversify the Nigerian economy, we went into agriculture, which was great and fantastic. But the recent insecurity, especially around areas and villages where we have so many farmers, our farmers are being killed. There is so much clash between farmers and herdsmen. So people who ordinarily, in terms of human capital, that will have cultivated so much food now, are killing themselves. So we are likely to run into what we call food insecurity. So what the US is doing has some basis and some grounds, and some nations can be willing to negotiate with the US. But I will be surprised if a greater part of some of these powerful nations will be bothered about negotiating with Nigeria.
Well, thank you very much, Bala Zakar, for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Well, we've come to the end of today's edition on Money Matters. To watch us again, it's simple. Just follow us across all our social media platforms at TV360 Nigeria. Thank you very much for watching. I am Adeshewa Ojushoga. Bye for now.